Hello, hello, hello. Magandang hapon po sa ating lahat, Luzon, Visayas, and Mindanao. Mayap at gapon sa ating mga kapampangan at mga kabalen na imbagamalin po sa ating mga kabsat at masantos yangarin sa ating mga kababayan dyan sa Pangasinan at marahain hapon sa ating mga Bicolano, sa ating mga kapatid sa Bisaya, maayong hapon, maupay nga kulop, maayong ugto. At sa Mindanao naman po, assalamualaikum, malingkat mahapon, mapiya kautuwa, alongan, and buenas tardes. Alam nyo, very interesting na naman ang topic natin sa hapong ito. Pero bago po tayo magsimula, nais ko munang ipakilala dahil meron tayong bagong makakasama sa hapong ito at sa mga susunod pa na episodes natin. Ang atin po kasing dating kasama ay nakahanap po ng talagang natrabaho na talagang naakma sa kanyang background na gustong-gusto niya pong gawin, pero siya po ay nandito rin at lagi din susubaybay sa atin tuwing Biyernes. So atin pong salubungin ng palakpakan ng ating bagong kasama sa hapong ito. Siya po ay si Mr. Mark Flores. Welcome sa ating SDG Action Hour, Mark.
Maraming salamat po at magandang hapon din po sa ating lahat. Ako po ay nagagalak na maging kabahagi ng isang makabuluhang programa tulad po ng ating SDG Action Hour. At dahil ito po ang unang araw ko sa SDG Action Hour, nais ko pong batiin ang ating mga panauhing Balinyaga. Good afternoon. Anyang sayo. Konnichiwa. Salamat siyang Yang Wu Chao. At welcome din po sa ating mga regular na tagapakinig at tagapanood dito sa Zoom at sa ating Facebook Live. Hello po sa inyo lahat.
Ayan, hello and welcome again, Mark. Nako, siguro sa mga darating na panahon, talaga magiging sanay na sanay ka na. Sa ngayon, lakom nangangapa pa tayo. Pero welcome sa ating SDG Future Earth Family. So, welcome uli sa ating ngayon ako hapon na ito. Akalain mo, umabot na tayo sa ika-66 or 66th episode ng The Filipino Sustainable Development Goals Action Hour or SDG Action Hour. Ito yung ating lingguhang kumustahan, kwentuhan para sa maganda, maayos, mabuti at makabuluhang kinabukasan. Isang oras to ng hitik na hitik ng talakayan na mga usapin talagang dapat pag-usapan. Yung ba yung sinasabi natin usaping napapanahon? Alam mo ba, Mark, ang ating guest sa hapong ito ay very special dahil siya ay isang tinatawag nating science diplomat. Naku, kung ano yan, siguro si sir na guest natin mamayang mag-explain ano ba yung science diplomat na yan, At ang kanyang tatalakayin sa hapong ito ay talagang napapanahong pag-usapan kasi ito ay tungkol sa climate smart Philippines or Science for Service. Naku, mamaya malalaman natin kung ano talaga yung topic na yan.
Ay naku, Miss Dala, talagang very interesting po yung topic na yan. Alam naman po natin ang issue ng ating bansa. El Nino, La Nina, hindi po natin mapredict kung ano po nangyayari. Mamaya mainit, tapos biglang uulan, tapos may drought, kulang sa tubig. Kaya po ang mga problema kinakaharap ng ating bayan. Ang ating po special na panahon ay multi-awarded not only locally but internationally. He is the founder and chairperson of the Climate Smart and Disaster Resilient ASEAN, Chairperson of the U.S. ASEAN Fellows for Science and Technology, Chairperson, Asian ASEAN Science Diplomat, Climate Diplomat for Europe and Asia Expert Panel for Climate Diplomacy, Fellow of the Philippine Council for Foreign Relations, at President of the Environmental and Climate Change Research Institute.
Talaga naman ang ating guest ay scientist par excellence, He's a prolific scientist, diplomat, educator, and one of the leading experts on environment, climate change, and disaster risks in Asia. He's also a recipient of the Asia Leader Award, Sustainability Leadership, and the youngest honoree of the most distinguished, the Outstanding Filipino or TOEFL laureate in the field of environmental management. Ito ay conferred by the National Academy of Science and Technology or the NAST. Granted din siya ng Royal Society, the World Academy of Sciences, and Environmental Defense Fund for Solar Radiation and Management.
Talaga po nakakalula yung achievements niya, Miss Dada.
True.
Ako po, ni sa katiting, wala po ko na-achieve doon. Idagdag po natin, Miss Dada, recipient din po siya ng Philippines Men and Women of Science Outstanding Agrofishery Scientific Paper Gold Award. Ang ating pong guest ay kasama po sa team that won the Rockefeller Foundation Food System Vision Prize Special Mention Award. At the best pa pong award na natanggap ng ating speaker ay ang United Nations Sasakawa Award. Ito po yung award na binibigay ng United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction sa mga disaster risk reduction researchers and scientists. Nako, Ms. Dada, ang dami pa talaga achievement and milestone ng ating guest that were very proud na binigyan niya tayo ng pagkakataon to grace our SDG Action Hour this afternoon.
Kaya nga, Diyos ko talaga totoo, nakakalula ang achievements no, and accomplishment ng ating guest for this afternoon. Pero alam mo ba, Mark, kaya naman ganyang kagaling ang ating speaker for this afternoon pagdating sa topic na tatalakayin niya, ito ay sa kadahilan ng he studied climate change and energy at Harvard Kennedy School, Harvard University. And he also took sustainability leadership from the Center of Environmental Law and Policy ng Yale University. Hindi lang yan na, he also took applied remote sensing technology from the National Aeronautics Space Administration, NASA. Nako, ano bang masasabi natin dyan? Talagang binigyan tayo ng oras ng ating panauhin sa hapon na to.
At kahit po napaka-busy niya, kailangan talaga pong laking papasalamat at siya po ay narito kasama po natin. Napakapalad natin na pinaulakan tayo ng ating panauhin sa hapong ito. Huwag na natin itong patagalin pa, Ms. Dada. Pakinggan na po natin ang napaka-interesting topic ng ating speaker for today.
Oo nga, Mark. Ako kasi gusto ko talaga malaman niya kasi climate change na talagang sobrang namumroblema tayo dyan, ano? So, tunay namang nabubutik-tik ng napakaraming awards and recognitions ang ating speaker. Kaya wag na natin patagalin ito. Let us give the screen to our guest, no? And everyone, let us all welcome Science Diplomat Glenn Suerte Felipe Banaguas. Hi, sir. Good afternoon.
Hello, magandang hapon po. Good afternoon po sa inyong lahat. Isang mapagpalang hapon sa ating mga tagapakinig at sa ating mga kaibigan.
Go ahead, sir.
Sige po. I'll share my presentation. First, I'm going to start with a video presentation about Climate Smart Philippines. And after that, I'll proceed with my presentation.
Banaguas is a multi-awarded, prolific scientist and diplomat, and one of the leading experts on environment, climate change, and disaster risks. He analyzes conundrums brought about by climate change and extreme events using scientific models, data, and spatial statistics, applies participatory mechanisms, recommends science and evidence-based policy solutions, and provides resilient and sustainable programs. Climate Smart Philippines Science for Service is the program he founded in 2010, providing elucidations in reducing disaster risks and preventing potential damages and losses through scientific wide-ranging assessment, risk and impact analysis, capacity development, project management, and multilateral cooperation among actors. The Climate Smart Philippines project applies the power of multi-stakeholder participatory mechanisms, providing more informed, participatory, and integrated governance and management at all levels, increases public and private sector investment and financing programs for required infrastructure and services. It also plans practices and implementation capacity to address complex interactions and trade-offs among the utilizations of resources. Climate Smart Philippines is science and evidence-based, where all stakeholders are empowered using credible sources of evidence, which are based on multiple lines of scientific research and education, such as considering zoning and new building codes for land, adjustments on the agricultural calendar, climate proofing or climate smart approaches, renewable energy, in the off-grid areas, climate-smart rainwater harvesting systems, monitoring and evaluation systems, gender equality initiatives and the role of women, the use of traditional knowledge, sustainable land, and forest management. Climate Smart Philippines is people-centered. It has a strong focus on tackling the innumerable roots of the impacts of climate change to make sure there is actual coalescence in the quality of life of the populace today and the coming decades. Stakeholders are trained in the implementation processes to ensure resiliency through psychological and religiosity and spirituality approaches. To date, Professor Banaguas has developed and implemented more than 200 projects in the Philippines alone. From Climate Smart Philippines to Climate Smart and Disaster Resilient ASEAN. More than 50 projects in Southeast Asia in partnership with his ASEAN Science Diplomats and the U.S. ASEAN Fellows for Science and Technology. In summary, Glenn's plethora of endeavors is more than an advocacy. It is beyond science, technology, innovation, and policy. It is about bringing people together, not only to be trained to be resilient, but to be part of the community that will inspire others and serve humanity wholeheartedly. This is Science Diplomat Glenn S. Banaguas.
Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Yes, I would like to inform you that that particular video that was presented a while ago is also the video that was shown in 2022 during the awarding of the UN 𝐒𝐸𝐴 Award for Disaster Risk Reduction. And I would like to share that particular award to our with our Filipinos, with our fellow scientists and engineers, not only in the Philippines but all around the world. Okay, my title of the presentation is all about Climate Smart Philippines Science for Service, and I'm going to provide you what Climate Smart Philippines is all about and why I call it Science for Service. Now, this particular program that I founded in 2010 covers 81 provinces, 146 cities, 1,488 municipalities, and 42,046 barangays. Now, every time we call it, there are people who are telling, oh, Glenn, what do you mean by climate smart? How are you going to differentiate it with the different definitions of climate smart? Here in the Philippines and in this particular program, the approach is, climate change mitigation and climate adaptation, ways on how we're going to mitigate, address the impacts and risks of climate change. So I use this particular framework, a trip to resiliency and sustainability. So in order for us to attain climate smart, you're addressing the climate change, you're addressing the impacts and risks of climate change. Okay, you have the climate adaptation, wherein you assess the risk and how you're going to manage the risk. And of course, in terms of mitigation, this is where you apply different strategies and how you're going to reduce your GHGs or greenhouse gas emissions from the different sources. So I call it a trip to resiliency and sustainability. So let's start with the climate change adaptation. The track risk impact policy, a trip to resiliency and sustainability. This is the framework I developed again more than a decade, where T stands for track, R stands for risk, I stands for impact, and T stands for policy. So track assessment. So we talk about human resources, demographics of a certain community. Then historical analysis, because in the tracking assessment, it's really very important to know what happened in the past. And here we also consider different climate scenarios and projections in terms of rainfall and temperature. What happened before, what is happening right now, and what is going to happen in the future. For instance, in a certain province, city, or municipality, what happened there before and what is happening right now. For example, what's going to happen in the future in terms of rainfall. Is that particular province going to experience increasing amount of rainfall or increasing amount of temperature? So these are the things that we take into consideration. And in terms of climate scenarios and projections, we use different global climate models. We use them in our analysis. and provide that kind of training to different stakeholders. Now, for the track assessment, the trip to resume sustainability will not be possible if you're just going to stick with the rainfall and temperature, if you're just going to stick with track. It is also important to understand the risk. And here we used the United Nations framework, the UNDRR, where risk is assessed as a function of hazard, exposure, and vulnerability. So since this is Climate Smart Philippines, I'll be focusing more on different climate hazards. Exposure, if the exposure is in terms of people, may it be individual or may it be population, there's a corresponding vulnerability parameter that we use. We either use the Human Development Index, wherein age, education, income are integrated, 𝐂𝐥𝐢𝐦𝐚𝐭 under HDI, who are more vulnerable to different types of hazards. The people are young or the people are old. In terms of education, who are again more vulnerable. The people who have education or the people who don't know anything. And in terms of income, who are again more vulnerable to different types of hazards. The people who are rich or the people who are poor. So you have your hazard exposure, vulnerability, then you will be able to assess the risk. Now, if you ask me, Sir Glenn, what if the exposure is in terms of our assets, fishery assets, all right, our buildings, our infrastructures. So the vulnerability parameter there that we use is the vulnerability parameter we use is the GDP, your gross domestic products in terms of damages and losses. So the vulnerability parameter differs, right? It really depends on the exposure. If the exposure is in terms of population, you use the HDI or the poverty incidence. And for the vulnerability, the exposures in terms of assets, buildings, infrastructure, they use damages and GDP in terms of damages and losses. Now, just to provide you an example of what we did, one of the projects that we had in the past, this hazard exposure vulnerability. If you look at this particular map, the redder the color, it means there are more tropical cyclones that enter the Philippine air responsibility and made their landfall in that particular region. All right. And this one, exposure, is in terms of population. The bluer the color, it means that there are more populations that are exposed in this particular hazard. And the vulnerability is the HDI, so we use the Human Development Index, and we found out that the lowest HDI is recorded in the areas of Mindanao. So then combining all of them, then you will be able to assess the risk. Now, another example, during the pandemic, we helped the government. Definitely, you'll see a lot of hazards, number of incidents of COVID-19. Then part of our commitment to help the government during the time is, all right, so it's not just the number of incidents that we need to provide. We have to assess the risk, all right? What areas with a high incidence of COVID-19, or what's going to happen to those areas if, for instance, sea level rise is going to happen. So this is sea level rise. The second map is about flood, and the third map is about tropical cyclones. So like what I mentioned is, all right, so what we did is to analyze, right, not just to determine the hazards, but to determine the risk. Which particular areas in the Philippines are at risk to COVID-19, and if sea level rise is going to happen. So these are the areas. So the yellow color stands for the low risk, the orange color, the moderate risk, and the high risk are with the red color. So these are just some of the examples that we provided to the government. Now, again, it's not enough that you have the track, and of course you have the risk. It is also important to determine the impacts. All right, the track and the risk, they are more technical in nature because that's it's more of simulation and scientific approach. But the impact, this is more of qualitative approach because it's also important that you are not just doing the quantitative, but you are also doing the social science approach. This is more of a qualitative, more of a participatory. So just to give you a very simple framework, this is Philippines, region, province, this is the municipality, and then the climate stimulus. So for example, we were able to identify a certain municipality. So what is going to happen in that particular municipality in terms of climate stimuli, rainfall and temperature? For example, that particular municipality is going to have an increased amount of temperature and also going to increase amount of X amount of rainfall. So that's how we define the climate stimuli. Then exposure and sensitivity who are exposed, all right, from this particular hazards, all right. Exposure, the people. So what kind of people? What sector? Is it the health sector? Is it the agricultural sector? The fishery sector? So that has to be identified. Now, this is also very interesting because once we identify the exposure and sensitivity, that's where we ask, all right? We assess them. So we have the biophysical, the socioeconomics, the psychological, and the religious and spirituality. So why biophysical assessment? So in order to validate if the models are correct, we have to go to the areas and interview these people. So it's also vice versa. You go to the area and validate that to a certain model. So questions like, example, you compare. So how are you, for example, under the biophysical assessments, when was the last time, for example, how are you going to compare rainfall before? How are you going to compare the rainfall right now? How are you going to compare the temperature before and the temperature nowadays? Now, those are just some of the questions. Now, under the socioeconomic assessment, for example, for the farmers, how was your your yield before, and how are you going to compare your yield right now? So about your income, what was the income of our farmers before, and how are they going to compare their income right now? So again, those are just some of examples of the socioeconomic assessment. Under psychological assessment, now in 2013, when Super Typhoon Haiyan or Yolanda made its landfall, more than 30,000 people died, and we know what really happened there. It was really a big devastation. There was food insecurity, there's water insecurity, and it took 3 months before electricity came in. Now, under psychological assessment, the reason why we're including this, we integrate this in our assessment because we want to know the level of trauma, depression that of these people who were affected by that particular hazard. So I am not a psychologist, so there's a psychologist in the team. And this is what we found out, that in terms of post-traumatic growers, these are the people who have been experiencing different types of hazards. So that's why we call them post-traumatic growers, or their post-traumatic growth is high. So if you are, for instance, is someone who hasn't experienced devastation, who hasn't experienced a 240 kilometer per hour super typhoon, a category 5, and it's first time you experience that, then your post-traumatic growth is low. So that's how we identify the people, the survivors, in terms of psychological assessment. Now, another thing, this is really very interesting. Now, religious and spirituality assessment. Now, we found out also when every time we travel to different areas, and this usually comes out in your FGDs, in the focus group discussion, we found out that, these people will tell you, sir, we follow science. Sir, we follow everything. But still our family members die. Now, the reason why we were able to survive was because of their faith. And now that's the reason we always integrate religiosity and spirituality as part of a resilient armor of the Filipinos, because we do know that not only in the Philippines, but also in the Southeast Asia, we are very religious in nature. So every time there is, we are in our worst situation, in the most difficult situation, we pray. That's why it is included in our study, that religiosity and spirituality as part of the assessment, as part of a resilient armor. Now, I have to include here, for example, in the Bangsamoro region, in BARM, there's another one. So I did not include because these 4 types of assessment only limit is really for the Philippines, but for the Bangsamoro region, for Mindanao, specifically for BARM. So there is also a conflict assessment. So the conflict assessment, wherein we determine the number of incidents of terrorism, the number of incidents of conflicts, and even those things, all right, that are happening in those areas. So we are not only estimating the climate risk, but we are also considering the security of the people who are living in that particular area. So once we determine this assessment, then we move on to the adaptive capacity, because we will be able to identify the level of adaptive capacity of that particular community or municipality, and then we provide them the strategies on what they're going to do. Okay, so you have the T, you have the R, because the approach is holistic. You have the track assessment, you also have the comprehensive risk assessment, and then you have your impact assessment. The next part is the policy. All right, we want to make sure that these programs and projects that we recommend that are going to be developed and be implemented in those municipalities, cities, and provinces are aligned to the international framework. For instance, the use of the IPCC, the UNFCCC, but for example, in the DRR, with the Sendai framework, and of course the Republic Acts that we have in the Philippines, the Climate Change Act and and of course the Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Act. So we want to make sure that these particular programs again and projects are aligned to the international and national frameworks. Then we also have the plans. We found out because we have been traveling all over the Philippines, Luzon, Visayas, and Mindanao, and we found out that there are still municipalities that haven't updated their plans. For example, the CLUPs, the comprehensive land use plans, their CDPs. Now, it will only be classified as enhanced CLUP or enhanced CDP if your CCADRM are integrated into the system. So you will see in some municipalities, their CLUPs are not yet enhanced, their CDPs are not yet enhanced. And these are very important, especially if the areas are at risk from different types of hazards. So every time we travel and we talk to them, we checked their CLUPs, all right? And we provide them, we recommend that it has to be enhanced, wherein there's climate change adaptation and disaster reduction management strategies have to be included in those particular plans. Then we also help them in their CDRA, the Climate Disaster Risk Assessment, and of course the LCCAP, the Local Climate Change Action Plan. So these plans these are the things that we provide every time we travel to those different areas of the Philippines. Now, we also want to make sure that the programs and projects are aligned to the priority areas of the National Climate Change Action Plan in terms of food security, water sufficiency, sustainable energy, human security, ecological and environmental stability, climate smart industries and infrastructure, and the knowledge management capacity development. So the programs and projects that have to be developed and implemented in the different municipalities and provinces are aligned to our priority areas of the National Climate Change Action Plan. Now, under the mitigation, because the adaptation is to be more of the local government unit, provincial, provinces, municipal cities, and municipalities. For the mitigation, oops. Okay, this is what we do. We assess, then we provide a roadmap. We assess the different types of the sources of carbon or carbon dioxide equivalents, how they're going to be reduced. All right, and definitely we develop the roadmap and provide them the strategies. So, for instance, these are just some examples of the net zero emissions, or low carbon neutrality, or low carbon diet, or decarbonization. Net zero emissions for the building infrastructure, energy, the type of fuel that they use, transportation, if you are taking private or public vehicle, waste, if you are because we also want to estimate the carbon of the waste, if it is a hazardous waste, solid waste, or even if it's a wastewater. So there are actually carbon dioxide equivalents or carbon that it emits, all right, if you're dealing with waste. The same thing with food. So we provide them, we estimate the type of food that they eat, all right. This is for the employees or for a certain institution. The humans, the number of times you use your cell phone, the number of times you send emails, and the number of times you text. So we also estimate that kind of GHGs. And of course, the agriculture and the forestry, and so on and so forth. So what did we do? How we were able to penetrate the different areas in the country? What we did is we established an MOU. This is a very good example. In Mindanao region, we established a memorandum of agreement with MINDA, the Mindanao Development Authority. And part of what we did in that particular area is not just the promotion, but the implementation of the food, energy, water for you Nexus system, and is to train all the stakeholders. So the provincial government, the local government units, the academe, the private sector, and even the non-government organizations and CSOs. So that's in partnership with MINDA. So we travel. So I'm going to make it fast. So it is in Davao City, Sarangani Province. I'm going to make it quick. This is Soldan Kudarat Province, South Cotabato, Tacurong City, General Santos, Cagayan de Oro City. And in that particular partnership, we were able to create a network in Mindanao. So that is with MINDA, of course, the ILG, CHED, NEDA, the OST, and our research institute, the Environment and Climate Change Research Institute. Now, for the Climate Smart Bangsamoro, this is in BARM government. So some of the staff members, when ARM, remember before it was ARM, but in 2019, BARM was born. So some of the people of Mindanao were transferred to Bangsamoro or Barm. So we just replicated what the kind of approach that we did in Minda. So we did or we replicated that kind of approach here in the Bangsamoro region or Barm. And here, like I mentioned a while ago, we are not only considering the climate risk, but we're also considering the security risk. So we not only identify the most at-risk areas from different types of climate hazards, but we also identified the areas that are at risk from terrorism and of course, conflicts. Okay, so these are the Visayas region, Aklan, Balay, this is in Leyte, in Eastern Samar, this is in Bohol, this is in Masbate, now in Luzon, Sorsogon, Aurora, Batanes, Palawan, Quirino, Benguet and Baguio, then Pangasinan, Bataan. In Quezon, we went to Poguillo, General Nacar, Infanta, and then Real. This is in Tarlac. This is Climate Smart Mindoro, where we were able to train the Mangyans. This is in Batangas, in San Luis, Balayan. And in Batangas, we did not only consider the climate hazard, but we also considered the different geohazards too. Okay, so it's not enough because these are climate smart Philippines program, because it's very important that it has to be mainstreamed. So we also provide trainings. We bring science closer to the hearts, not only to the local government units, but also to the hearts of our farmers and fisher folks. So these are the areas that these are the different NGOs, farmers and fisher folks cooperatives. So we train them how to use science in their everyday lives. Then we also did we had partnership with the National Commission on Indigenous People. This is really very important because you can, for example, if you have a project in a certain area, you will be needing an FEIC. You will be needing a free prior informed consent. We have to win the hearts of the tribal leaders, the people or the IP people there before you can come up with a very good program. And this usually happens in the most remote areas of the country. And that's the reason why we had our partnership with NCIP and the National Commission on Indigenous People. So that's for the IPs. So aside from that, it's because we cannot do it alone. Honestly, we cannot do it alone. We cannot do it alone. And that's also the reason why we also train. We have the TOT, training of trainers. We provide trainings to the different academic institutions in the area. So later I will show you our partnership with PACU, the Philippine Association of Colleges and Universities. I will show that to you. Like what I mentioned, it's really very hard if you're going to do it alone, and it's going to be easier if you're going to provide trainings to different universities and colleges. Why? Because I cannot travel, we cannot travel there. So if you provide that kind of training to that university will help that his own province or its own locality. And that's the reason why I provide that TOT. Now, for the private sector, of course, the Philippine Chamber of Commerce, we partner with them, and now with the Management Association of the Philippines, because there are things that the private sector, there are things that they don't know, all right, and they need science, they need us scientists, science diplomats to provide them the most, in terms of resiliencies, in terms of sustainability approaches that will really help their businesses too, on how they're going to be resilient, how they will be able to come up with the most sustainable solutions. Now, aside from that, the new and renewal partnership and collaborations, so since they saw the essence of what we do, yes, we signed with PACU, the Philippine Association of Colleges and Universities, and like what I mentioned a while ago, part of the capacity building, part of the training is, of course, we train the universities and colleges how science will be used for policy making, for decision making, and how science will be used by them, all right, to train and to help their own province, cities, and municipalities. Then there's also a renewal for Mindanao Development Authority, because when we started collaborating with them, it started in 2016 with the late Secretary Alonto. And now with the new Secretary Acosta, part of our commitment is not only to provide them the most resilient solution, science-based approach, gender transformative schemes, but also to estimate the GHGs, the greenhouse gas emissions of the entire Mindanao. Then this is what I mentioned, the climate security program for BARM. So we partner with BARM, and this is in our lead agency there is MENRE, the Ministry of Environment and Natural Resources. Then together with their MPs. Then also last year we were also tapped by the Union Leagues authorities of the Philippines, and the ULAP is the League of Governors of the Philippines, Leagues of Cities of the Philippines, League of Municipalities, League of Vice Governors, League of Provincial Board Members, Vice Mayors, and so on and so forth. So like what I mentioned, it's really very hard to do it alone, and this is good to have to strengthen the collaboration like ULAP, all right, with President Dax, who is also the governor of Quirino Province, to strengthen the relationship with them, to provide them the most practical, scientific, science-based and evidence-based approach in order to come up with the best resilient and sustainable solutions. And then, because this is also one of his goals, he wants his province to be the first net zero emission leader in the country at the provincial level. Then I also help out, right, the Philippine Airlines, our flag carrier, because part of our commitment with Philippine Airlines is we wanted to be the net zero emissions global leader in the aviation industry by 2050, which will start in 2030. And here at Philippine Airlines, it's not only limited to SAF, the sustainable aviation fuel, but this also includes the different types of sources of carbon and how it is going to be reduced. Okay, so I'm sorry. I think my time is up. So I'm sorry, I'm very talkative. I'm talking too much. So let me end my presentation with this. Since Lenten season, it's Lenten season, and in 2 weeks' time we're gonna have our Holy Week. And this is for our scientists, for our researchers who have been experiencing different types of dilemma. Okay, whatever that be. So always remember that God answers our prayers in 4 ways. Yes, yes, I will give it to you. I will give it to you because it's good for you. Yes, no.
Yes, sir.
I will give it to you, but not the way you want it. No, yes, I will not give it to you today, but you will have it someday. And no, I will not give it to you because it is not good for you. So thank you so much for listening, and God bless everyone.
Ay, thank you so much. Naku, talaga namang interesting ng iyong share sa amin, sir. Naku, napakalawak na pala ng inyong mga nagawa, sir, in that field. At the same time, ang network ay napakalawak na rin.
Balik lang kayo dito.
So, ayan, natapos na naman ang ating 1 hour and a half. Marami pong salamat sa ating lahat. Maraming salamat sa speaker natin. And thank you. See you all again on Friday, same time, same channel. Kala mo merong channel talaga yung TV na dating babalikan. So, thank you po and see you again on Friday.
Miss Dad.
Yun pong mga naghahanap ng certificate nila, yung link po
Recording
nasa chat
stopped.
box kanina pa. Kanina pa po yung